Ladies and gentlemen, this morning's program is about to start. Please take your seats and mute your phones.
Going for show lights. Going for translator spots. Iedereen zit.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Princess Mabel von Oranje and Miss Gunilla Carlson, Deputy Executive Director at UNAIDS.
Good morning, everybody, on this last day of the International AIDS Conference 2018 here in Amsterdam. It's wonderful to see that so many of you turned out for what I think is an incredibly important session. You all know my passion for adolescent girls, and that's what a lot of this morning is going to be about. Now, worldwide, as you know, girls and women, especially in resource-limited settings, remain extremely vulnerable to infection and also to accelerated disease progression. And a comprehensive response in the fight against HIV/AIDS, and especially focused on girls and women, requires more evidence and more information about what's happening and how best to tackle it. And therefore, the International AIDS Society, together with UNAIDS, and supported by the International Center for Research on Women and the international community of women living with HIV and AIDS, have established an amazing prize, the Women, Girls and HIV Investigators Prize. And the prize is all about encouraging research in resource-limited settings on what can be done to improve the situation of girls and women. And I'm incredibly excited that the moment has come where this prize is going to be submitted, and I'm going to ask my dear friend Gunilla Carlson, who is the Deputy Executive Director of UNAIDS, to now take over from me so that she can reveal who the lucky winner is this year.
And at the International AIDS Conference 2018, the Women, Girls and HIV Investigators Prize has been awarded to Zachary Quina in recognition of the outstanding abstract called Barriers to Linkage and Retention in HIV Care Among Adolescent Girls and Young Women in Communities Around Lake Victoria in Western Kenya. Congratulations, Zachary.
To introduce our first plenary speaker, please welcome to the stage the Executive Director of UNICEF, Henrietta H. Fore.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And a very special welcome to the young people in the audience today. And welcome to the last plenary of the session for IAS 2018. We have been having an amazing conference. I think all of us are honored to be invited. I know I certainly am, and I am really proud and excited about the energy and the commitment that I see at the conference. So last year, the Oxford Dictionary selected the word youthquake as its word of the year. It's defined as a significant cultural, political, or social change arising from the actions or influence of young people. I can't think of a better word to describe the critical role that young people play in our world today. For you are changing our world, from fighting stigma and racism and homophobia to protecting the planet, to changing how to use technology to communicate and connect across communities and around the world. But around the world, young people are also facing difficult life circumstances and great risks. Today, more than 60% of the world's 1.2 billion adolescents live in low and middle-income countries. Many do not have the chance to complete a secondary education, and they're not acquiring skills they need to prepare not only for their own futures, but the futures of their families and their communities and their societies and nations. In September, UNICEF and our partners are launching a new partnership to gather around the needs of young people. With our partners, we're identifying and bringing to scale new solutions that will benefit young people's education and skill development. But our efforts to combat the barriers that young people face, poverty, disadvantage, the lack of education, skills, and opportunity, must be matched with our intensified efforts to address the HIV epidemic among adolescents. Despite the world's progress in fighting this disease over the last 40 years, among young people, the rate of new infections remains unacceptably high. Among adolescents, there are 250,000 new HIV infections per year this last year. At our current pace and level of effort, some 3.7 million new HIV infections are projected to occur among children and adolescents by 2030, and 1.2 million of them will die. Last year, 38,000 adolescents died from preventable AIDS-related causes. In fact, this disease remains the leading cause of death among adolescents in Africa. Our current pace is simply not good enough. We need to not only accelerate our current efforts, we need to partner with and for young people to meet their prevention and treatment needs, from helping them to know where and how to access services in their communities, to providing services that are welcoming and free of stigma and discrimination, to constantly improving the quality of the services and treatments. And that's what this plenary session is all about, moving from why to what. We'll hear about cutting-edge science in neurocognitive development in adolescents and how it should influence our programming. We'll discuss how education can change behaviors. And we'll hear from three amazing young people, at least two that are here with us, but others in the audience, whose journeys from hardship to leadership can inspire us all. So I now have the pleasure of introducing Annelies Goddings, a clinical lecturer at the University College of London, Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. She specializes in pediatric medicine and adolescent cognitive neuroscience, and it originates from working with adolescents in a variety of clinical settings. She has a PhD, has published extensively in this field. So please join me in welcoming Annelies.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation to come and speak to you today. As has already been explained, I am a clinical lecturer in cognitive neuroscience and admit that I know a little less about HIV and AIDS than most people in this room. However, I think we can all agree that the problem and challenge of HIV/AIDS in adolescence is an ongoing one and hasn't necessarily responded as well as HIV/AIDS treatment and management might have done in some other age groups. And what I'm hoping to do today is share with you some of the research done by me and colleagues in my field, looking at how the adolescent brain develops, to help understand why some of these challenges may be particularly poignant in adolescence. Think about why some of the amazingly effective treatments and managements that are being developed might work, and help to think about how together we can focus some of our efforts towards things that are more likely to work in adolescence. I'm going to do that by focusing on 3 different areas of brain development in adolescence, because 25 minutes isn't long enough to take you through the whole lot. I'm going to think first of all about the social brain and explain what that is and why this is of crucial importance to understand in adolescence. Secondly, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the prefrontal cortex more generally and how the fact that this is still developing in adolescence influences the way adolescents think, make decisions, and perform their judgments. And thirdly, I'm going to touch on the subcortical development, the regions in the center of the brain that are involved in very different but integrated procedures. The field of adolescent cognitive neuroscience is only about 20 years old, because it's at that point that functional resonance imaging was able to be used in adult and adolescent populations to look at the brain, and not just look at the structure of the brain, but also to look and see how it works. And as developmental neuroscience studies were published, we discovered that far from stopping developing, the adolescent brain is still ongoing development, probably through to the mid-20s. If we look across the brain, the development is not the same in different regions. And what this graph shows is going from left to right. It shows young people from age 8 to 20. And the regions in yellow are the regions that are undergoing more change at each of those ages. So the regions in red are relatively static in terms of how they're developing. Their volumes are pretty similar across these ages, whilst the regions in yellow are showing a lot of change. So for an audience who perhaps don't necessarily look at this brain and think about what each region does, I want you to focus on the regions, particularly in yellow, towards the ages of 18 to 20. And I'm going to pick these out for you. These regions, known in blue as the anterior temporal cortex, green, the medial prefrontal cortex, yellow, the posterior superior temporal sulcus, and pink, the anterior temporal cortex. These regions together form a network that perform very specific functions in humans. They're called the social brain. Now, rather than give you a long description as to what the social brain is and how powerful it is, I'm going to show you a picture. For any football fans out there, this is football. And I think this is particularly important given our recent World Cup experiences. Now, the important thing about this picture is every person in this audience looks at this picture, and from it you get some shared information without me telling you anything. There is a man lying on the ground, it's Michael Owen, he's just missed a goal. You can tell he's not happy from his body language without even being able to communicate with him. But also, you can see that there are a whole load of other people in this picture. And you can see that they are sharing an emotional experience with Michael Owen. They're not talking to him, he's not explaining how he feels. But not only are they able to understand how he feels, they're mirroring his body language, and they're feeling it too. You can see, if you look carefully, there are a couple of people in the audience who are wearing yellow, who are having a very different experience. They seem very happy. And the chances are they're probably in the wrong area of the stadium and are supporting the other team. Now, your brain did all of that in milliseconds, and that are these social regions of the brain. As well as being able to infer all the emotional responses and thought processes of people you've probably never met, you also have probably developed an emotional response to that yourself. You may be thinking, I remember that game. You may be thinking, I wish I'd had more breakfast. But in any of these circumstances, you cannot separate your own personal social understanding from every other decision and interaction you're making in the world. Now, the social brain is still developing in adolescence. So what does this mean for how adolescents may process social situations differently, or perhaps the same, as adults and children? We did one study in our lab, and I just want to show you some of the basic science from which we make huge interpretations. In this study, we asked young people and adults to lie in a scanner and read a series of emotions. These could either be social emotions or basic emotions. Now, the thing that's special about social emotions is you have to be able to understand that there's somebody else and that they have thoughts, feelings, and opinions. So guilt and embarrassment are two examples. If you take the word your friend out of the sentence up on the screen, you accidentally broke your necklace. Okay, you might be sad, you might be angry, but you wouldn't feel guilty unless that necklace is associated with somebody else. Again, embarrassment. You were eating and you dribbled down your top. Well, again, frustrated perhaps, but you can only feel embarrassed if you recognize there's someone else there and that they think something about you as a result. These emotions we know require these social brain regions. In comparison, basic emotions like fear and disgust, you feel whether there are other people there or not. So if you're scared of spiders, you're scared of spiders. It doesn't matter if someone's watching you be scared of spiders or not. And sure enough, as we put people in the scanner, the brain regions activated when they're thinking of social emotions are different from those when they're thinking of basic emotions. But crucially, the way the brain regions work is different as you go from adolescence to adulthood. So thinking back to those brain regions, one of them, the medial prefrontal cortex shown here on the screen, is more active in adolescents than adults. Now we know the prefrontal cortex, and particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, is particularly important in taking in different pieces of information and trying to assimilate them to work out what to do. And this suggests that this is still an ongoing, relatively active process in the brain of young people. Whereas by adulthood, you can see that this brain region is activated less to feel these emotions, suggesting that by adulthood, you've kind of got it down. You know, okay, embarrassment, I've got that one sorted. It doesn't stop you feeling the emotion, but it changes the way that your brain is processing feeling it. In contrast, a different area of the brain, the anterior temporal cortex, is more active in adults. Now, this brain region is to do with memory. And again, our interpretation of this is that by adulthood, you know how to respond to situations. You don't necessarily think it through in the same way as adolescents might. And this area is less active in adolescence. So putting these two together, we have inferred from this that adolescents are still developing these social responses. They're still working out how to respond in different social situations. And this may be in situations like this, that they're just as capable of expressing and feeling those emotions. But actually in other studies, we've found that adolescents may also have experienced higher or different emotions than adults in the same situations. So this study is very simple. We got adolescents to lie in a scanner and we explained to them that before we did anything important, we just needed to check that the video camera in the scanner was working. This is for another study. They didn't need to worry about why. We just asked them to lie still in the scanner and stare at the screen first. And we told them, by the way, when that little red light in the corner of the screen you can see in the third image is on, that means the camera's working and there's a graduate student sitting in another room who's just checking the picture. So adolescents didn't have to do anything in this particular study. All they had to do was lie there. And at the end, we asked them how it felt to be lying there and what it felt like when that camera was on. And even when doing nothing, you can see from this graph, which goes from age 6 to age 24, this shows levels of embarrassment whilst just lying in a scanner with someone maybe watching them. And you can see from that inverted U shape that as you go from childhood to adolescence, even this very simple process is more embarrassing for adolescents, and then becomes less so as you get into adulthood. So adolescents are particularly vulnerable to social situations. And sure enough, when we look at what's going on in their brain at this point, the medial prefrontal cortex is particularly active as you enter adolescence, which relates to this feeling of particular embarrassment, even when you're not doing anything wrong. There have been a number of studies now that have shown how the social brain during adolescence is continuing to develop. And this influence on the social situations put to adolescents can be of huge opportunity. So in terms of thinking about how this influences us, this means that peer-led interventions, peer-led teaching are understandably going to be of huge value. The way your peers and the way society sees you is particularly important during adolescence. It also means that this is a wonderful opportunity for positive role models. This is a point at which the adolescent brain is still developing, is learning how to respond to social situations, is understanding how to integrate this information. And the more positive influences that young people can face, the more opportunity they have to learn the positive outcomes of that. However, this importance of the social brain also puts adolescents in a vulnerable position. Part of this idea of developing the social brain is removing the pre-existing notions you had of who you were, which essentially is a mini parent of your own, or mini whatever world you grew up in, and instead realizing you can be anything you want to be. Now that should be so positive, and for so many adolescents it is, but it's also a time of vulnerability. It means you are impressionable, and it means you are potentially at risk of going off positive track, or if you already grew up in a time or a world of challenge, that actually unless you get positive experiences, those will not improve. So knowing who you are involves breaking the social norm of what you're in. And that, where often the social norm was relative safety of childhood, means you can be at risk. It also means that being excluded from a social group is particularly important during adolescence. We know that as you go through adolescence, not only are you susceptible to social influence, but these brain regions are particularly active at the threat of being ignored, excluded, ostracized. Young people have far more likelihood of reacting to something because of the fear of being excluded. And it doesn't take me to tell you that for many communities where HIV and AIDS are hugely stigmatized, that therefore if you have adolescents whose brains are reacting more to the threat of social exclusion, that stigma is going to continue the negative cycle related to being able to talk about safe sexual practice, safe drug use, as well as treatment and medication for HIV and AIDS. Thank you. There's one other aspect I want to mention about the social brain before we go any further. As much as we would love to prove otherwise, most of our studies in adolescent brain within the lab show that it's so much easier to influence a young person towards negative behaviors than positives. We've tried to show the positive impact of adolescent peer behavior, and it is there. If you are surrounded by young people who attend school, who go home on time, who have positive self-reported behaviors, it does slightly improve your behavior, but your risk of being pushed towards negative behaviors if surrounded by other young people who are as well seems to be much easier to imitate in the lab, and we think is probably much more there in real life. So this social brain, and in general the developing adolescent brain, which can so often be seen as a reason why adolescents are at risk, can potentially be a wonderful opportunity, but it does leave adolescents and young people open to vulnerabilities. Now, the prefrontal cortex, which I've spoken about a little bit, does a huge amount more than just social brain. And it's actually one of the most important regions of the brain for us as adolescent cognitive neuroscientists. It's also a pretty important part of the brain for thinking about what human beings are compared to other species, although there are other species arguably can do some of these things as well. So one of the groups of functions that the prefrontal cortex is involved in with networks of other brain regions are executive functions. Now, executive functions are lots of the more complex things we do as human beings. So being able to be flexible in our thoughts, being able to recognize that in some situations your automatic response is not right, and being able to change that and think about how the situation may be different. Being able to inhibit that prepotent response, the automatic thing you want to do, and instead opt to do something different. Being able to plan, being able to multitask, forming judgments and synthesizing information, and putting all of this together into decision making. Now, if the prefrontal cortex is still developing in adolescence, how does this impact on the way in which adolescents can do these crucially important executive functioning? Again, I'm going to show you an example from our lab. This is something called the direct task. Again, it's a relatively simple task because cognitively we need to keep things simple to try and understand what's going on. In this task, you are standing in front of a set of bookshelves with a whole lot of objects on them. You are told that the director, the white male standing on the other side of the shelves, is going to ask you to move an object. Now, what you have to understand, and you're shown in a practice, is that the director can only see the objects that don't have a background on them, okay? So in this situation, for example, he would not be able to see the white truck or the cassette tape. You can see how old this task is, that it still has a cassette tape in it. Now, the important thing about this task is the young person is asked to move the top truck left, okay? And what they are asked to do is identify which truck he's talking about and activate that on the screen. Now, there's a control condition, a condition in which this doesn't require thinking both about which object and thinking about what the director knows. And in that one, young people are told just ignore anything that has a greyed out background and just move the things that have a clear background. So in this example, if you are asked to move the top truck left, you need to move the blue truck, not the white truck. Now, as a task, most of the participants are able, outside the scanner, to understand what this is. And sure enough, when you do the no director one, so this is where you just move the objects that do not have a grey background, by the age of about 14, young people are able to do just as well as adults. So on the, you can see there, the percentage errors gets pretty small by the time you get to 14 and shows gradual improvement across adolescence. However, putting the director in requires the social brain that we were talking about before and makes the task more complex. It's actually the same task, but it makes it more difficult. And sure enough, as we look, the number of errors made on this task increased dramatically. But what I want you to particularly notice is those blue bars continue to get smaller as we go across age. So the 14 to 17-year-olds who understand the task, who can perform according to the instructions, and who have perfect cognitive ability to do this, if you put additional stress on their brain, if you make it a little bit more complex, if you change the situation, the way they respond to that is different from adults. Now, obviously, this is a simple task, and I'm not for a second suggesting we can mimic this in every situation. But if we move this to a slightly more real-life, simple decision, in this instance, should I smoke a cigarette? This task and many others show us that actually adolescents know the facts if they are taught them. They are able to absorb those facts and regurgitate them and understand what those facts mean. And yet, whether an adolescent will smoke that cigarette, in fact, whether any of us will smoke that cigarette, is not just based on the facts. It's based very much on what the social element is that's going on in our brain as well. So if I am standing up on this stage and someone gives me a cigarette and says, do you want to smoke this? The chances are I'll probably say no because of the social impact of doing so in front of all of you and it probably being against the rules. However, if you're a young person in amongst your social peers whose respect you desire, whose negativity may have crucial importance on your life, and if we change this situation to not, should I smoke a cigarette, but should I use a condom, then you will find that your ability to make that decision changes depending on where you put social influence on that seesaw. Now, again, this is simplified. There are always multiple social influences. But as practitioners, as people who work with young people trying to make complex decisions in life on a daily basis, unless we can fully understand their social influence in those decisions, it will be very challenging to ever be able to change their behavior. I spend part of my time as a clinician working in clinics, and virtually every adolescent I speak to can guarantee that they are going to take their medication on time as I've asked them to, and they understand why they're doing it. And yet when I see them 3 months later and have a conversation, many of them will admit that maybe they were able to take it 25-30% of the time, but they really, really wanted to take it. It's not that they didn't want to do what I asked them to do and what they agreed would be good for them. It's that actually when they're making that decision on a day-to-day basis, that rational judgment is only part of what makes that decision. So the prefrontal cortex is still developing. Again, this doesn't have to be bad. There are opportunities associated with this. And one of the things that cognitive neuroscience and psychology have shown is that adolescents are capable of processing facts and making rational judgments, just like adults. This notion that adolescents are not capable is, in most experiments, wrong. However, the way in which adolescents do it and the information they use may be different. So therefore, we may perceive their answer as wrong, but in fact, it may have been appropriate in that situation, and what we need to think about is ways we can modify that. Adolescents are open to new ideas. Again, as long as this region of the brain is developing, it is particularly susceptible to being able to change, and that can be positive as well as negative. And they have fewer, although still some, concrete opinions. Again, they can change from the opinion of their parents or their upbringing into pretty much whatever they want. But again, with this come vulnerabilities. Judgment and decision-making are impacted by environment, and we cannot take that away. We have to work with it. Adolescents and young people differ from children precisely because of the fact we cannot totally control their environment, and instead we have to allow young people to experience the world. If nobody ever took a risk, nobody would leave home. Nobody would go off to university. Nobody would move to the city to find a job. Nobody would fall in love and meet somebody new. Risks are crucial in adolescence, and they are crucial for young people to understand who they are, but the environment puts them at potential vulnerabilities. Another aspect of the prefrontal cortex and this planning side is that long-term consequences are less influential on decision-making for adolescents. So the importance of explaining that you take your medication today to prevent something happening in 20 years' time just doesn't factor as highly on your decision-making rationale as we as adults think it should. Now, I say that actually for many adults it doesn't factor as highly as we as practitioners think it should. So this is not isolated to adolescents, and it's not that this is the case for all adolescents, but in general, on average, thinking about using long-term consequences as a way to persuade someone to do something here and now today, when on the flip side they've got all of the social norms and social consequences of whether or not they do something today, doesn't seem to work very well. Finally, planning is susceptible to changes in routine, particularly in adolescence. Again, the more complicated you make these decisions, the more you push the prefrontal cortex to try to assimilate information, the harder it is to get it right. So again, the challenge of having to take medication at the same time every day is harder for the teenage brain. It's not impossible and it's not insurmountable, but it is also to do in part with the way the brain is developing and not just about the desire or the will of the young person. Finally, I'm going to briefly mention to you about subcortical development. Now, some of the subcortical regions are shown on the screen, but there are a number of subcortical regions, and these are involved in many tasks, but in particular thinking about emotional processing, memory and learning, reward processing, and motivation. In particular, I'm going to talk to you a little about the nucleus accumbens, which is involved in reward processing. Now, unlike the prefrontal cortex, this is a brain region that actually seems to develop relatively early in adolescence, and maybe even develops some extreme functioning in adolescence, so it's sort of hyperactive during the adolescent period. So this was a simple task done just in Leiden by a group that looked longitudinally at how the brain processes rewards. And this was a simple coin toss exercise. So you opted heads or tails. If you won versus if you lost was looked at how your brain is activated. And the little blue areas on the brain picture are the bilateral nucleus accumbens. And the activation when you won versus when you lost was particularly high during the adolescent period. So it was increasing through adolescence and then decreasing as we approached adulthood. If we put all of these things together, we put together a developing prefrontal cortex, an active or hyperactive subcortical reward processing region, and people, we get what has been shown beautifully in a task now about a decade old by Larry Steinberg and colleagues from Temple University. This is a driving task, otherwise known as the chicken task. So you're driving a car through a series of obstacles in order to get to the end. The quicker you get to the end, the more reward you get. However, as you're going, you approach a number of intersections where there is an amber light, and you have to make a choice. Do you put your foot down, try and race through the light? If you succeed, you get to the end of the task quicker and get more reward. But a car may come from the other direction, crash into you, and cause a long delay as your car resets itself. Or do you do the sensible thing, stop, wait for the light to go green, and in doing so know you're using up some time, although not as much as if you crashed? Now, initially when this study was done, it wasn't clear how young people were going to respond. And it was a little surprising to some of the researchers that actually whether you were 14 to 18, so an adolescent, 19 to 21, so a young adult, or an adult, which was over 21 in this study, you actually did just as well if you were in this study. And again, this shows the importance that your brain is working as an adolescent. Many parents tell me how, oh, my teenager, do they even have a brain? Or, oh, tell me how to get it working. It's working and it does its job brilliantly. However, if you put two friends behind the young person when they're undertaking this task, it changes their performance, and it does this. So if you're a young adolescent, you are then 3 times more likely to crash. If you're in between, so you're a young adult, you're twice as likely to crash. And if you're an adult, you do exactly the same thing. And if that wasn't helpful enough, the nucleus accumbens, this reward-seeking part of the brain, is activated in the adolescents when their friends are watching them, but not in the young people or the adults. And it's not activated in the adolescents when they're by themselves. So again, this is teasing apart the ways in which adolescents and young people make decisions that can be the same as adults, but can also be more affected by the situation you're in. Again, there are opportunities associated with this. Adolescents can be passionate, motivational, determined drivers for change. The activation of these regions means that you can have a value associated things that you just can't in childhood, without necessarily the limitations that some get in adulthood. It also means, if we're thinking about ways to intervene, that adolescents can be particularly susceptible for reward-based interventions. Now, this can be money, but it also can be social interventions, it can be time, it can be other positive associations of decisions. But again, there are vulnerabilities that are what we tend to focus on more. And there is a tendency to rewarding, otherwise known in adulthood as risky, decisions when you're in stimulating situations because of the importance placed on the way your subcortical regions are activated. It also means that, again, as I spoke about before, you're susceptible to negative emotional responses. The regions of your brain that are fully activated are both about reward but also about emotional response. And again, negative responses can cause an awful lot of change in behavior as well as positive. So I just wanted to draw together from all of this a couple of specifics thinking about HIV/AIDS and thinking first of all about education. The adolescent brain can process facts about health risk behaviors. And this means first and foremost we have to ensure that every adolescent has access to those facts. Without them, it's impossible to expect an adolescent to be able to make anything resembling a rational decision. But in addition to the facts, we also need to empower adolescents on how to manage real life. And so simply being able to give a fact about safe sex in a very objective but austere and sterile environment doesn't actually help when you're thinking about how that situation would happen for real. So thinking about methods of experiential learning, of socio-emotional development, in order for a young person to be able to empower themselves to make decisions that are actually what they want to make in other situations. As I've already mentioned, peer-led education has been shown across many different environments to produce very different results. And again, that makes sense in what we understand about the teenage brain, where peers and social influence are of great importance. And most importantly, we need to empower young people to know their brains. Many young people I speak to understand that they wanted to do something, and then in that situation, they didn't. And actually being able to empower young people to help understand their own decision-making takes some of the onus and responsibility off me trying to change their opinion and allows them to have the decision-making as to whether or not that is something they want to engage in. And unless we allow young people to understand the ways in which their brain is working and how that relates to behavior, we're fighting a losing battle. Again, thinking about HIV prevention and management, separating decision-making from stimulating situations. So thinking about pre-exposure prophylaxis, letting adolescents make a decision in advance as to safe sex practices may be of immense benefit for some adolescents. On the flip side, pre-exposure prophylaxis also requires you to be able to have the planning and organisation to take medication every day, which for some adolescents will be an onus on it itself. Linking long-term goals to short-term benefits. Now, I admit I don't go to many HIV/AIDS conferences, but one of the things that struck me walking around yesterday was the message that undetectable is untransmittable. Now, this, based on neuroscience, should be much more positive. This is about what can I do today that makes decisions today for me and my future, not how does taking something change what might happen to me in 10, 15, 20 years' time. We need to change social environments and reduce stigma. These are of crucial importance to adolescent decision-making and behavior. And as long as societies have stigma regarding adolescent behavior, both in terms of whether or not they smoke cigarettes, but more particularly whether or not they are having sex and whether that sex they're having is safe, whether they are using drugs, who they're associating with, how they are feeling, whether their mental health is impacted, the list goes on. Until we improve that stigma and allow young people to talk amongst themselves, but also to their peers, to their families, and to every social network they have, we will continue to exaggerate the problem that adolescents have in terms of social situations. And again, empower young people to know this. The very last slide, adolescents are not an average. I just want to point out that most of the area of neuroscience at the moment deals with averages. It compares adolescents to adults, it compares adolescents to children. And this pretty graph that I showed you just now of the nucleus accumbens shows adolescent nucleus accumbens peaking around the age of 17. These are what the data actually look like. This is what every individual's nucleus accumbens is doing over time. And just because, on average, adolescents do these things more does not mean that the young person sitting in front of me has a defective or poorly functioning nucleus accumbens. The way it works is specific to that individual and specific to their behavior. We've got a long way to go. There's a lot of things we don't know. And what we particularly don't know is how chronic disease impacts on brain development during adolescence or indeed into adulthood. But for now, I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
To introduce our next plenary speakers, please welcome to the stage Her Excellency Kim Simplis Barrow.
Good morning, everyone. Cindy Cynthia Samuels is a youth ambassador from Guyana and a field officer working with the Guyana Sex Work Coalition. She was born in rural Berbice and grew up in Georgetown, the capital of Guyana. Cindy completed secondary school in 2012 and plans to study law. Meanwhile, she works with youth on advocacy to end AIDS. Please help me welcome Cindy Cynthia Samuel.
Many thanks to each and every one of you in the fight, especially HIV persons. What is sex work? Sex work is the exchange of consensual sexual services or performances 18 years and over for money, goods, or anything of necessity or value. Sex work is work. The International Labour Organization report of Committee on HIV and AIDS, which accompanied the publication of recommendation concerning HIV and AIDS and the World of Work 2010 number 200, know that sex work is work which is both formal and informal. Sex workers are not all persons living with HIV and AIDS. Not all sex workers have HIV or AIDS. People tend to label sex workers as the victims. This is a misconception. Sex workers are regular people with families, partners, and friends. Some have other jobs and also study to improve their skills. What sex work is not. Sex work is not human trafficking. Sex work is not sexual exploitation. Sex workers are not vectors of disease. Framing all sex work as sexual exploitation, trafficking, or violence against women destroy self-determination of sex workers. This stigma violates human rights and impedes on the HIV response. What do sex workers do? Many sex work organizations are committed to providing young activists with skills which may even progress into leadership roles within organizations. Sex workers continue to build their capacity in areas related to sexual and reproductive health to enable better engagement and sensitization of members of the sex work community locally and regionally. Empowering sex workers. We have been working with Guyana Sex Work Coalition in conducting training workshops in areas such as HIV and testing, linkage to care and treatment, and condoms and lubricants, including the do's and the don'ts with condoms. Present in the Pan-Caribbean Partnership on HIV, led voice and instrumental in the formation of the Caribbean Sex Work Coalition. Empowering sex workers. GSWC provides sex workers with an opportunity to contribute to the 1990 goal by enabling them to bring essential services to sex workers in the remote areas of Guyana. GSWC also works with children of sex workers. Data shows that 63% of persons infected with HIV who are youth. Early engagement of young people gives them the tools to allow them to be more informed when they engage in sexual behaviors. My personal development. I continue to develop my capacity and empower myself through continued exposure to training opportunities at both local, regional, and international level. I have been able to pursue my academic training on a part-time basis. I stand here today as a living example. Whether sex workers choose to stay in sex work or leave it alone, we can still be leaders and contribute to the 1990 goal and bring about changes. Thank you.
Two very interesting presentations, thought-provoking. Gautam Yada, and I probably just butchered your name, from India, identifies as gay and living positively with HIV. He has dedicated himself to working hard for the establishment of an identity for LGBTQ communities. Gautam has served on the board of the UNAIDS Youth Advisory Forum in Asia Pacific and is a working core community member of Youth Voices Count in Bangkok, Thailand. Please help me welcome Gautam.
In the conference, many people have talked about building the bridges. But today, let me talk about breaking the barriers, because only if barriers are broken, I, you, and everyone will be able to stand and build the bridges. Good morning and welcome everyone to this very special plenary of the last day of the conference. I am Gautam Yadav from India, and I have been living with HIV for 9 years. I came to know about my HIV status when I was 18-year-old. I had to come out twice, first as a gay person, then as a person living with HIV. Initially, I was too scared to reveal my HIV status to anyone until I began my work with the Humsafar Trust. It is through the work there that I met so many people and gained the confidence to come out and speak about my HIV status and the issues which really matter to me and the people from the PLHIV community and the LGBT community. I stand before you today, 9 years later, as an openly positive gay men and proud member of AMPEC's International Steering Committee. And I am unflinching in my commitment to fight HIV-related stigma and homophobia. Lack of public awareness and social stigma keep many people away from the basic service, even like HIV testing. Stigma, discrimination, and violence directed at gay, bisexual, transgender people, people who use drugs, and sex workers can be especially harsh. Members of these communities may feel too ashamed or scared to get the services which they need. I have personally driven several of my young gay friends to HIV testing centers who then turn out to be HIV positive. But always one wonders how long they must have been living with HIV. When I tested positive at 18, my CD4 count was already quite low. And I'm sure I must have been living with HIV for a while. The triple stigma associated with being gay, young, and HIV positive person, that's especially challenging to overcome the challenges. For a long time, I suffered in silence, and I had no support. Some support mechanisms are available today, and they should avail to all people living with HIV. People living with HIV, especially members of key population, should have easy and safe access to the services they need, free from stigma, discrimination, of the fear of violence. There needs to be higher level of awareness among HIV negative people too, so that they are sensitized to our issues. I would like to grab attention of the government and the donor agencies in this room and ask them what kind of investment have been made to influence the lives of youth, and what are the future strategies to improve the life of youth who are living with HIV or even who are not living with HIV, and adolescent for that matter. We talked about greater involvement of people living with HIV, and I see and I congratulate Kevin sir on being appointed as a new executive director of IAS, though it took over 2 decades to get an openly out gay man living with HIV as an executive director for IAS. But I am very happy that it has happened. Better late than never. IAS has shown the way, and I really hope the other UN agencies, government and donor agencies will follow the same. I have recently been giving a lot of thoughts to how we build the support and leadership in HIV and social change movements. To prepare new leaders, we must first make space. We must also provide meaningful opportunities to knowledge, exchange, and skill development. And when I'm saying this, we just not come up on the stage and saying that we need to do this, we need to do that. We actually need to start doing it. This includes building capacity to take down structural barriers to health by changing policies, making health universally accessible and affordable. This must also include decriminalizing homosexuality and the sex work. In so doing, we will ensure that leaders are successful in ending AIDS. We need a dialogue and more inclusivity of unorganized group in future international conferences. Dialogues always leads to solutions, and effective solutions are needed. I also wish in my home country, India, Section 377, which criminalizes homosexuality, will read down soon. Lastly, I would like to thank the AIDS 2018 AMPACT Global Action for Gay Men's Health and Rights, formerly known as MSMGF, the Humsafar Trust, and let me also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Vivek Raj Anand and Manvin Singh Gohil for their unconditional support. Because of that, I'm here. Thank you so much. And last, I also wanted to thank International AIDS Society for providing me this opportunity to be here. Thank you.
To introduce our third speaker, please welcome back to the stage Her Excellency Kim Simplis Barrow.
And I take this opportunity to make my presentation. Good morning, everyone. This week has been truly inspirational. It has been a great honor and privilege for me to participate in the International AIDS Conference. As the spouse of the Prime Minister of Belize and the Special Envoy for Women and Children, addressing and advocating for the needs of one of our most vulnerable populations is a labor of love for me. And as the chair of the Spouses of CARICOM Leaders Action Network, I have been so grateful to have had the opportunity to be here with my co-chair, good friend, and outstanding advocate for women and girls, Sandra Granger, First Lady of Guyana. I have had the distinct privilege of talking with so many engaged and determined individuals this week. I have been particularly moved by the conversations with the children and young adults infected or affected by HIV, who are charting their own course of advocacy with unparalleled energy. Thank you to the organizers for creating the space for these young voices to be heard. We must listen to them, recognize them, and empower them as the leaders of the future. I was thrilled to listen to my longtime friend Erica Castellanos, a Belizean transgendered leader living with HIV. She enlightened us about the progress made and the challenges that remain for our LGBT sisters and brothers. Erica embodies the dignity and courage within the HIV community as she advocates for an understanding of the humanity that is central to how we must all approach the HIV/AIDS epidemic across the globe. And we must all take heed of Prince Harry's salient reminder that, and I quote, "We stand here at a moment when the progress we have fought so hard for is at risk from a dangerous complacency. Too many around us, around the world, are still ignoring the damaging knock-on effect on education and other community services from not prioritizing HIV prevention and treatment. As the Special Envoy for Women and Children, I recognize the importance of education and its potential to transform lives and offer a better future for our children. This is essential to securing an AIDS-free generation. Part of this means that we need to ensure that everyone approach to testing, care, and suppression of HIV must be adopted. The crucial role of peers, caregivers, families, teachers, and communities in general must be recognized. They must be equipped to support our at-risk or HIV-positive children and youth. Adolescents must be empowered to lead, participate in, and shape youth-friendly services, policies, and research. As parents, educators, and stakeholders, it is our obligation to find ways to sensitively discuss sex, dating, and relationships with our young population. Policies and programs must be put in place to address factors such as unstable family structures and poverty, which limit HIV-positive youth from seeking and maintaining treatment. At the core of it all is a need for our societies to have frank and open and sober discussions on many hot button topics: sex and sexuality, including sexual orientation, gender equality, among others. Each of these topics is a subject of intense debate, strongly held convictions, and cause great divisions among us, certainly in the Caribbean. As advocates and leaders, we must have the courage to foster these discussions nevertheless, in as respectful and inclusive a manner as possible, but never losing sight of what is at stake. Our children and young people will see their lives in the future being cut short without more purposeful education and intervention. Educating our youths will ensure that they are able to make better informed decisions, including decisions about their sexual health. We have the tools and knowledge to effectively address HIV. We cannot advocate our responsibility to do so. I am so proud to be on this panel with global health leaders I've had the privilege of engaging with this week. Allow me to single out Dr. Henrietta Fore. She had to leave, the formidable and passionate executive director of UNICEF, and Princess Mabel, a visionary advocate for women and girls. I look forward to closely collaborating with both in the future. In the Netherlands is known as having an evidence-based, comprehensive approach to sexual and health education. It is fitting, therefore, to hear from and learn from Reina Buij, the Director General for International Cooperation in the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ms. Reina Buij, she worked in the public health in Africa and South America. In the late 1980s, Reina was policy advisor on nutrition in the Nicaragua Ministry of Health. In 1991, she did the same for the Provincial Medical Director's Office in Masvingo, Zimbabwe. 2 years later, she returned to South America as a consultant on nutrition and health in Ecuador. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Crying like the old man slowly dying, and the only sound the wind that fills the trees. Even colder comes the moon, and though you never seem too soon, sudden stillness as the rainfall starts to freeze. I'm Mr. Blue, I'm here to stay with you, and no matter what you do, when you're lonely, I'll be lonely too. Oh, Mr. Blue, I'm here to stay with you, and no matter what you do, when you're lonely, I'll be lonely too. A young girl, she is shaded, bears the scars that never faded, of the baby that was born on Christmas Day. While the heavens sing their song, the child's life was never long, 'cause the food supplies will only last today. I'm Mr. Blue, I'm here to stay with you, and no matter what you do, when you're lonely, I'll be lonely too. Oh, Mr. Blue, I'm here to stay with you, and no matter what you do, when you're lonely, I'll be lonely too.
Ladies and gentlemen, the song you just heard became a #1 hit in the Netherlands 26 years ago. And the singer, who you just saw in the video clip, was visibly marked by AIDS. It was the first time we saw someone on national television who talked openly about his illness and about his approaching death. And then this young man, called René Klein, sang this beautiful song, Mr. Blue. It truly made a lasting impression on many Dutch people, including myself. Because in those days, most of us did not talk about AIDS. And if we did, what we said was based on beliefs, prejudice, and misconceptions, guided by fear, by ignorance, and even by hate. Most of us, in fact, just knew about some foreign celebrities, such as pianist Liberace, Queen singer Freddie Mercury, or the Russian ballet dancer Rudolf Nureyev. But AIDS in the Netherlands? No. To most of us, it was just something non-Dutch. Until that night, November 28, 1992, when we heard René Klein's story on national television, when we heard him singing Mr. Blue. That night, AIDS was given a face in the Netherlands. Now, this happened 26 years ago, and I'm glad to say that things have changed in my country for the better. Today, HIV is no longer a death sentence. Instead, people living with HIV go to the movies, they go to work, and they fall in love, and they have children. Just look, this radiant young woman at the picture behind me. This is Anne van der Laar, now 28 years old. She was diagnosed with HIV when she was 16, when she started having sex with her first boyfriend. Yet today, Anne is enjoying life, and she has 2 healthy children. And she visits schools to talk to young people about her own experiences. In other words, Anne is being open about her own situation. And I believe this is what it's all about. We need open-mindedness about sexuality, about sex, and about sexual health. Only then can we empower young people and give them confidence, competence, and knowledge. Let me share with you what I mean by using my own experience as well. When I was a young girl, my parents, like many, never talked about the difference between boys and girls. They never talked about sex, love, or relationships. So when I was growing up, I knew nothing about responsible sexual behavior or about broader emotional, moral, social, or legal issues. I wish I had. And that's exactly why I decided to adopt a different approach when I became a parent. Instead of having an awkward, all-embracing birds and the bees talk with my 2 children, I started an open and ongoing dialogue. I did not try to persuade them to delay having sex. Instead, I said that it could be great, especially in nice, loving relationships, and that sex would be even better if there were no risks, meaning it would be wise for them to use condoms. In short, what I was trying to do was to make my children feel confident and to enjoy sex whenever they felt the time was right. Now, after working for years as a diplomat, I realize this was a very liberal and very typical Dutch approach. But just, let's say, I believe in this multi-component approach we adopted in the Netherlands. This means a shared responsibility with an important role for parents, just as it means comprehensive sexuality education in schools, online programs, community-based activities if needed, and youth-friendly health services. To illustrate, let's take the example of comprehensive sexuality education. In the Netherlands, all primary and secondary school students must receive some form of sexuality education. Preferable education that is positive, emphasizing the importance of pleasure. Education that also includes issues such as building relationships, wishes and boundaries, sexual diversity, condom and contraception use, sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, and rights and responsibilities. It is why, for instance, the Dutch government financed a comprehensive sex education program called Long Live Love for teenagers. This school-based program was developed by STI-AIDS Netherlands in collaboration with Rutgers, the Dutch Center of Expertise on Sexuality. Rutgers also developed another program called Spring Fever, which is meant for younger kids in primary schools. How do these educational packages work? That depends on what age you are talking about. But just imagine a classroom with 7-year-olds sitting in a circle, boys and girls, and a teacher asking them, "Who here has ever been in love?" Those children, of course, start giggling at the question. But then hands, little ones and bigger ones, do shoot up. It's during these classes a teacher shows the children a book with drawings, so he can talk about what it feels like to love someone, or what kind of intimacy feels good and what kind of intimacy doesn't. This way, we try to empower our younger ones to express their boundaries. And we try to teach them that it's okay to make choices and that these choices are equally valued, whatever their age or gender. But learning about sexuality does not stop there. Our kids are also expected to be able to name body parts correctly, including genitals, just as they learn that it's perfectly natural for 2 men or 2 women to be in love. And when they are teenagers, they talk at school about changes during puberty, about masturbation, about dating, about safe sex, and about wishes and boundaries. What's more, alongside classes on sexuality education, special evenings are also held organized by our regional public health services. During these meetings, parents can hear about the school's own approach, but they also give advice on what they can do to support their child. In other words, in the Netherlands, we try to link sexuality education with parents, communities, and health services. Yet, this doesn't mean all Dutch children learn about relationships and sexuality in a comprehensive manner. It's not everywhere that schools adopt programs like Long Live Love or Spring Fever. Why, you may well ask? In order to systematically implement comprehensive sex education programs, schools should incorporate the programs in their curriculum. But for various reasons, that doesn't always happen in reality. Either schools believe that teaching the biological aspect of sexuality is enough, or they simply do not prioritize or value the importance. Moreover, sometimes teachers feel insecure, partly because they are embarrassed to talk openly about sex, or due to the diversity of cultural backgrounds. This still means we have a significant challenge ahead of us. At the same time, we also need to realize that societies change all the time. So do new generations. Think, for instance, of the widespread access to mobile phones and to social media. Today, young people are using internet to get hold of their information, to communicate with other people, or to visit sex sites and share pictures of themselves. It means not only that comprehensive sexuality education needs to continue to adapt, but that we also need a mix of interventions to reach young people in every group at every setting. And that's the reason, for instance, why sense.info was created, an online platform financed by our Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport. Here, YouTube, games and virtual reality are used to reach young people. And if they have personal questions, they can either chat or talk to a professional. And it works. The website receives over 2 million visits a year. And ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing other positive results thanks to our comprehensive approach. For example, a Rutgers and STI-AIDS Netherlands study called Sex Under the Age of 25 found that young people in the Netherlands are now delaying their first sexual experience. For example, in 2012, 50% of young Dutch people had had sex by the age of 17, while 5 years later, in 2017, the average age was 18. The same research also shows that when young Dutch people have sex the first time, 9 out of 10 use some kind of contraceptive, and 7 out of 10 use a condom. And the number of young people who have their first sexual experience at a very young age, between 12 and 14, has decreased. That's good news, because young people who start having sex at a very early age are more often forced or persuaded to do so, and often have unprotected sex. Finally, another positive finding of the research conducted is that many sexually experienced young women and young men enjoy sex. We are talking about 90 and 94% respectively who say they find sex enjoyable. So far, it's pretty much good news. But even in the Netherlands, it's not all a bed of roses. For example, we also see that when young people in the Netherlands stop using condoms because they have a sexual partner, many of them don't see a doctor for a test. I'm talking about 75% of young men and 66% of young women. So there's still a lot to gain in this area too. And when it comes to diversity and gender, we also see that Dutch gay and bisexual boys are experiencing discrimination and violence. The study Sex Under the Age of 25 showed that 2 in 5 boys were insulted because of their sexual preference. 1 in 6 was threatened, and 1 in 9 was kicked or beaten. We face other challenges as well. Many Dutch people still find it difficult to witness gay men kissing or holding hands. This is in spite of the fact that people in the Netherlands have become more accepting of gay, lesbian and transgender people. It's also in spite of the fact that same-sex marriage has been possible here for more than 15 years. And 17% of Dutch people still say they have negative feelings about the LGBTI community. So, ladies and gentlemen, attitudes in the Netherlands are still blinkered. And this holds true for many more places around the world. Because while we are gathered here today, and while I am making this plea for pragmatic, open-minded approach, millions of people are not able to obtain relevant information. Millions of people do not have access to contraception, to condoms, to healthcare or treatment. Just as millions of people are not empowered to stand up for their rights, nor allowed to express their sexuality as they choose. So, how can we make a change? All of us. How can we make sure that HIV infections are reduced? That young and old people, whatever their background and wherever they live, can be tested and treated without fear of discrimination, without violence and arrest. Mr. Blue and other Dutch lessons in love have shown me that there are in fact 5 important issues to keep in mind. The first and the most obvious is that there is an urgent need for high-quality, comprehensive sexuality education worldwide. And it's why I'm also very pleased to see that UNESCO and partners at the beginning of this year published the UN International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education in partnership with UNAIDS Secretariat, UNFPA, UNICEF, UN Women and the WHO. Secondly, we need to invest in partnerships. Governments like the Netherlands should not just fund organizations abroad, but should also work with them, give them ownership and build their capacities. Dutch embassies, for instance, are now working closely with NGOs, activists, church councils, local governments, and people living with HIV. Take AIDS Fonds, for instance, a Dutch NGO that supports civil society organizations around the world. Not so long ago, AIDS Fonds, in collaboration with Clinton Health Access Initiative and other partners, invested in testing and early treatment for people living with HIV in Swaziland. The result? Swaziland, one of the worst affected countries in the world, saw a drop of 44% in the rate of new HIV infections. A real breakthrough in the AIDS response. A third lesson in love is that we need to continue our open dialogue on inclusiveness and human rights, including sexual and reproductive rights, so that people can make their own informed decisions in whatever cultural context. I want to give you an example from my own experience. 7 years ago, I was ambassador in Nicaragua. You can see me on the photo behind me. Around the time this photo was taken, I visited a UNFPA project financed by our government and executed in cooperation with local governments, called Voz Joven, Youth Voice, which also means in Nicaragua, you young person. The aims of this project was to give sexuality education in an age-appropriate way and in order to prevent HIV and AIDS. Quite a challenge in the rural areas of Nicaragua, particularly in the indigenous communities in far remote areas. In those communities, young people were used to older people teaching them about right or wrong. And sexuality was a taboo. But having your first child as a very young girl was commonly accepted. Yet, young people in those communities were dying of AIDS. That's why I visited this sexuality education project. I wanted to know if it was working and how. It is then that I met an indigenous Roman Catholic priest, a traditional leader. When he first heard about Youth Voice, he was somewhat wary. But after the project officers engaged him in his role of leader, he became instrumental as a crucial player. The priest made sure that children and young men and women in his village got parental permission to attend the meetings that were organized. Then different age groups were formed. And depending on people's age, they were asked questions like, what would you like to do with your life and with relationships? And do you want to be sexually active? It can be beautiful and exciting, but do you also know what it can mean? Let me tell you, all of these questions resulted in ongoing dialogues. It showed me that even in the most remote areas, people were starting to talk more openly about sexuality as well as HIV and AIDS. And it did lead to something. During my visit, a traditional judge approached me. She told me that her granddaughter had participated in this program, and she learned to think about her future. This girl was now studying in a city nearby, and her grandmother hoped she would be able to continue her education. Sexual education is important, the judge said. Also for me, she added, because now that I know what HIV can do to people and how important it is to talk openly about relationships, I also look differently at our own jurisdiction. Before, the judge said, we would have offered a cow or a pig to the parents of a girl in a case of sexual violence. But now I realize this kind of behavior is simply not acceptable, and I act upon it. This example, ladies and gentlemen, this story of the grandmother who is a judge, showed me that we can change behavior and that we can change attitudes, if we only are willing to take that first step in finding ways to start an open dialogue. And I'm also happy to say that 2 years after my stay, Dutch evaluation research showed that our support in Nicaragua had improved the treatment and understanding of HIV and AIDS, and the use of contraceptive increased, just as the number of teenage pregnancies decreased. Then the fourth Dutch lesson in love. We should strive for participation of young people in all aspects of programming and research. And I mean all of them. Young women, young gay men, young sex workers, young transgender people, young men and women who use drugs, young people who are living with HIV. All of them. Because it's about their life. And even more importantly, they can truly bring about change. And I'm thinking, for instance, of 26-year-old Humphrey Nabimanya from Uganda. He is here with us today, and some of you may know his story. For years, Humphrey was stigmatized and excluded because everyone thought he had HIV. That's also why he decided to strive for justice, why he became a youth peer educator, and why he started his foundation, Reach a Hand Uganda, and why he got support from organizations worldwide, like Rutgers. Today, Humphrey has reached hundreds of schools, and he hosts a Youth Voice program on national television, in which he discusses issues affecting young people in Uganda. He also invites Ugandan celebrities as motivational speakers, so that they can address issues such as HIV, stigma, peer pressure, unwanted pregnancies, and sexually transmitted diseases. Humphrey now is creating electronic apps for young people in his country, enabling them to access and receive information and services while remaining anonymous. What I'm trying to say is that thanks to other people's support, Humphrey now dedicates his life to inspiring young people like himself. Finally, a fifth and final Dutch lesson in love. Focus on the root causes. Why do young people have unsafe sex? And why do teenage girls get pregnant and have unsafe abortions? All too often, gender inequality is one of those root causes. For example, in many places around the world, young girls have sex with older men because they are poor. Or girls are already married as children to much older men. It means that we can give people all the information in the world and promote comprehensive sexuality education as much as we like, but if there is still no gender equality, there will be no decrease in the number of people that are becoming infected with HIV. So, what we need to do, all of us, is to advocate. We need to promote gender equality. We need to promote health and well-being. We need to promote sexual rights as human rights, through information, through education, and through diplomacy, so that everyone, one day, can enjoy sexual pleasure and lead healthy, safe, and worthy lives, no matter who we are, no matter where we are from, no matter how much money we have. Or, as Judge Edwin Cameron so elegantly said in his Thomas Mann lecture 2 years ago, we do not ask for tolerance. We do not ask for acceptance. We claim what's rightfully ours. That's our right to be ourselves in dignity and equality with other human beings. We claim our right to be human. Thank you.
And I'm here to stay with you. And no matter what you do, when you're lonely, I'll be lonely too. I'm Mr. Blue, and I'm here to stay with you. And no matter what you do, when you're lonely, I'll be lonely too. I'm lonely too.
For a special presentation, please welcome to the stage MTV Shuga.
Why is that a condom? It won't save you from this disease.
There's a difference between love and sex. You remember that.
I'm HIV positive.
So am I.
Hey, you! Yeah, all of you! Stop! You, in the back! Where are you going? We're just getting started. Do you want to know how to reach young people? Do you want to change people's behavior? Do you want to save lives? Well, I've got the solution just for you. Don't believe me? Ask her. Hello. Good morning, Sanbonani. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Stephanie Sandows, and I'm all the way from the beautiful South Africa. And I just want to say, yay, for South Africa. So I just want to say that I've been here for the past 5 days, and wow, I am so impressed by the amazing work that young people are doing and activists are doing in their local communities. So just give yourselves a round of applause if you're here, yeah. So, before I start, I just want to say that I find it quite surreal that I'm on stage speaking to you right now, sandwiched between youth leaders and a former head of state. How the heck did I end up here, is what I ask myself. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering who on earth I am. Well, I'm an actor on MTV Shuga, a project which harnesses the power of entertainment to change young people's lives, and one which has the ability to create demand and change young people's attitude and behavior. And what's at the heart of all of this? One simple principle: the art of storytelling. So today, I am here to tell you the story of MTV Shuga. But before I begin, I just have one simple request, okay? Could everyone in the audience please stand up? Don't be shy. I know there's a lot of you, but there we go. Love the enthusiasm. Okay. Now, if you are over 25 years old, you may have a seat. It's okay. It's fine to age gracefully. It's fine. All right. So, those of you who are still standing, yeah, all of you, you are MTV Shuga audience. Okay, great. We could all have a seat. Thank you. Give yourself a round of applause. Want to know more about MTV Shuga? Take a look. Now, since 2009, there have been 6 campaign cycles spanning from Kenya to Nigeria to South Africa, and we have told a lot of stories along the way. But we don't just tell stories, guys, we bring about real change. We have a global reach of 720 million households. We've been broadcast on 180 channels in 79 different countries, and we've gained 270 million impressions on social media. We activate on-the-ground activities, a peer education program, graphic novels, and digital media to connect with the youth. Now, you may have noticed I invited a couple of friends on stage to help me tell the story of how non-traditional media campaigns have a vital role to play in affecting the sexual and reproductive health of young people. Georgia Arnold is the executive director of the MTV Staying Alive Foundation, a not-for-profit organization responsible for producing MTV Shuga, and Given Stearman, he's an MTV Shuga actor and ambassador who has brought the realities faced by young gay men to life through our drama series. Georgia will now give you some more insight into the MTV Shuga story while Given and I take a back seat. Georgia.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, good morning, everyone. Today, I am here to talk to you about sex. From our MTV Shuga TV drama to our radio show, digital media, and graphic novels, sex is the one thing that underpins everything we do. And quite frankly, it's the one thing that connects all of us in this audience and everyone around the planet. So on MTV Shuga, our messaging is driven by HIV, gender-based violence, transactional sex, pleasurable sex, contraception, unplanned pregnancies, self-testing, and PrEP. But sex as an idea is far more complex than just the physical act of it. It manifests itself in many, many ways, in all the ways I just listed. So in order to tackle HIV and SRH matters, we wholeheartedly believe that we all need to have open, honest, and respectful conversations about sex. Now, sounds easy? Well, not quite. It amazes me how around the world in every single culture, we all find it just so difficult to talk about, whether it's with our parents or our partners, our friends, our kids, our colleagues, nurses, or teachers. We are just very uncomfortable about those 3 little letters. But for us at MTV Staying Alive, we have the privilege to use mass media platforms so that we can speak with young people in a way that resonates with them, in a place where they are most comfortable at, often behind their screens, and in a manner that reflects their everyday lives. And this is where the role of media is so exciting. Communicating really important and often technical health messaging under the guise of entertainment may seem like an unusual pairing, but trust me, they are the most perfect of bedfellows. By leveraging the full scope of media, we're able to reach young people not just through their TV screens, but in every aspect of their lives and whichever screen they happen to be on at that moment in time. Now, while all of this sounds great, there is a real method to our madness. We have a 4-part model to position young people as trusted, credible, and meaningful partners, and we incorporate young people in every single stage of our campaign cycle. The power of MTV Shuga lies in its inability to really mirror young people's lives, and that encourages them to look at their own behavior. And this is where the first part of our approach comes in, and that's demand design. We run workshops and focus groups to integrate young people at the very primary stage of any campaign before we develop any content or scripts, so that we can really understand their perspective on key issues. Here are a couple of comments from transcripts from focus groups that we've just had in as we're plotting out our brand new season in South Africa.
Some of us are scared to test because we know the people who work at the local clinic. We are worried that if we test, then those people will disclose our status to other people.
There's no such thing as gazing closer. How can you become a man if you're gay?
Now, what you heard right there is a pure drop in the ocean, a tiny window into young people's experiences. But these insights, whether we agree with them or not, provide us with invaluable guidance to help us structure our storylines. Now, that's part one. Next, we have demand generation. And here we provide our audience with really important sexual reproductive health messaging by embedding it into the very fabric of our content. We place our trust in young people, believing that if we give them information and clearly signpost the trusted services, then they can act upon this and take action. And through digital media, we direct our audience towards our partners, and our TV show integrates helplines at the end of every show. In South Africa, with our last series, we worked with Mary Stopes International, and they experienced a 20% increase in calls as a result of having their helpline at the end of each episode. Part 3 is demand conversion. Giving people information is not enough. Collectively, we have to understand how to make use of this newfound knowledge. So here we mark out the path for young people to access sexual reproductive health services. Now, turning demand into real action is a difficult process. And later on, I hope that I'll be able to show you that this really does work. Despite the countless preparations that goes into any campaign, there is a real need to adapt in real time and respond to the evolving needs of our audience. So this is the final part of our model, user enhancement. Whether it be through in-show polling, on-the-ground activities, or digital media, we communicate with our target audiences in real time and tailor our approaches to suit them and in response to them. This generates a feedback loop that constantly harvests their thoughts and preferences. For instance, our in-show polling in South Africa generated 250,000 responses around key questions on HIV and sexual reproductive health. And based on these responses, we were able to tailor our content to address gaps in knowledge. So, there you have it, the real foundations for our behavior and demand creation campaign to achieve lasting success and affect norms in a real and measurable way. But there's one final ingredient that's important to note, and that is being able to use the MTV brand. We know that young people around the world recognize, respect, and trust this brand. So we make the most of the MTV brand because we're able to access a boundless pool of insights into young people. It provides us with a unique understanding among youth culture and helps us really understand what music they're listening to, what social media they're using, and what trends are catching their eye. But more than anything, it gives us a seat at the table when it comes to issues affecting young people. Now, it's all well and good hearing from me about how young people respond, but I'm sure you'll all agree it's much better to hear it from them. Given, you've got an interesting story to share.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgia. As an actor, my job is to bring individual stories to life, to provide a platform for people who may otherwise remain unseen and unheard. Now, when I was told I was going to play Reggie, MTV Shuga's first gay character, I was thrilled. Thrilled to have been given the privilege to bring the story to life, but at the same time I realized the heavy responsibility of carrying Reggie's soul on my shoulders. Now Reggie is a 17-year-old boy from South Africa. He struggles with his sexual identity and eventually comes out to himself, then his friends, then his family, all to a variety of responses. Now, in my time playing Reggie, I saw the weight of discrimination and stigma faced by those in the LGBTQ+ community. Now, this can have emotional, physical, and mental consequences for young people. For me, this is the most important stories that MTV Shuga has ever told. Have a look for yourself.
I 'm 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 'm
When you're hitting it off with Zamo, well, she digs you, everyone can see that.
But what if I don't dig her, dog?
Bongi, what's wrong with me?
There's nothing wrong with you, Rich.
Why can't I be like Q and the other guys?
Nkwatile and I'm disappointed. Don't find no peace in nonsense like your food.
Dad, how would you even know?
I'm going to make a man out of that boy if it kills me. Delisa.
What does this movie want to be your friend, bruh?
No, dude. No.
Okay,
Oh,
God. Let's go, dog. Let's go.
I'll see you around.
You don't respect. No. Look, that's not true. I respect you, you know, and it's just that sometimes I'm such a coward.
You're gonna have to make up your own mind about who you want to be. I'm gay.
Ta-da! And the world didn't end, did it?
So let's say I was gay. I mean, still be my boy would be all cool and all.
But you're not, dog.
But I am.
Hey, tell them I didn't know about this.
Hey, what the heck, bro?
Yes, boy!
If you back down now, Reggie, no one will respect you.
I said I'm gay. Did you even hear that part?
I carried you for 9 whole months. There's not a thing that I don't know about you.
I messed up. I'm sorry, bro.
I think you need to give him a proper hiding, bro. Smack the gayness out of him.
Shut up! This guy is better than all of us here put together. At least he knows himself.
If you want your dad to accept you, then you need to invite him into your world. Baba, I'm gay.
Don't talk about getting accept, yes?
Just never! Baba, you're gonna have to accept me for who I am. For the first time, I'm actually gonna do me. Yeah, I'm doing Reggie, and I don't care what anybody else thinks.
Thank you. Now, as you can see, Reggie doesn't have an easy journey. On top of this, he's part of a vulnerable group when it comes to HIV. In the first season of MTV Shuga down south, Reggie explored his sexual identity. And this week, we announced that MTV Shuga is coming back to South Africa. And without giving too much away, that's actually a point. And without giving too much away, in the second season, Reggie will explore his sexual debut and what it means to have sex as a young gay man. Now, Georgia mentioned earlier how hard it is to talk about sex in certain communities. It can be even harder. That is why having these open, candid conversations around sex for the LGBTQ+ community are vital. Many young people in these communities face unimaginable stigma and discrimination, and by extension are unable to access the services and information they so desperately need to protect their health. This is exactly why Reggie's story is so important. Now, Reggie's story was filmed in South Africa. There, telling such a story on screen is not always common, but it's possible under the national constitution. Yet, this is not the case everywhere, and in many places around the world, telling Reggie's story on TV is impossible. MTV Shuga is broadcast across the world, including in countries where it is illegal to be gay. So, what are we to do? We believe that it was important for our audience to engage with the wide scope of our messaging. MTV Shuga is not just about one message, it covers the whole spectrum of sexual and reproductive health issues. So we came up with the solution. Make 2 versions of the show. One with the LGBTQ+ storyline, and in full, one with the LGBTQ+ storyline in full, and one with a metaphorical reference where Reggie never really comes out. And this is where the digital world was so exciting. Now, MTV Shuga's online presence allowed us to transcend state boundaries and spread important messaging beyond South Africa. This helped challenge existing norms and provided important sexual and reproductive health information for young people who would otherwise be underexposed. This meant that local laws were respected, but we figured out a way to speak to our audience online instead. People like Reggie face excruciating difficulties, but he's not the only one. There are also those such as Stephanie's character who have to bear unimaginable challenges too.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was okay.
So just like Given, I too had to channel the inner feelings, emotions, and experiences of an adolescent girl trying to make sense of the world around them. When I found out that I was going to be playing Tulu, a young, feisty, bold 15-year-old, navigating her way through her teenage years in South Africa, I was super excited. There was so much in her that I could relate to. But when Georgia later said that Tsulu's story would be one of abuse, that she would represent the fact that 1 in 3 women throughout the world will experience some form of violence in their lifetime, I felt a heavy, heavy burden. 1 in 3. Just look around the room. That means at the very least, 1/3 of all of us women present in this room right now have or will experience some kind of violence in their lifetimes. My character, Tsulu, endures an abusive, controlling, and fatal relationship with an older man. Her fate, whilst traumatic, is not rare. Transactional sex is common in many parts of the world. For Tsulu, this relationship resulted in sexual and emotional abuse and ultimately her death. As part of my work with MTV Shuga, I have become very involved with outreach programs where I'm able to speak to adolescent girls in safe spaces and just better understand the real experiences that girls like Tsulu face every single day. Filming those scenes, putting myself in the shoes of young girls throughout the world who experience sexual and emotional violence was numbing. These stories, they're hard, they're horrific, but they need to be told. Not only does this have a catastrophic impact on our mental and our physical health, but more specifically on our sexual health too. As many of you know, by being an adolescent girl in sub-Saharan Africa, Tsulu is far more likely to contract HIV than her male counterpart. At a time when girls and young women should be focusing on relationships and education and being happy, Tsulu faces the unprecedented risk of contracting HIV. And that is why a campaign such as MTV Shuga is so important, because it addresses the challenges faced by adolescent girls and young women head on, to show us how to protect our sexual and reproductive health, to reinforce the message that gender-based violence is categorically wrong in all its guises, and to highlight where we can seek help if we need to. When dramatized, these stories can be quite shocking. Yet, is there any evidence that by telling these stories using media, we can provoke genuine change amongst young people? I think Georgia can give us some insights.
Wonderful.
Thank you, both of you. So, is MTV Shuga really able to affect change? What Given and Stephanie's on-screen stories have shown us today is the reality faced by many young people across the world and the challenges they face while trying to safeguard their sexual and reproductive health. Now, earlier on, I told you that we place our unequivocal trust in young people. Now, some of you might call us naive for doing so, but what I'm going to share right now will show you that our trust is not misplaced. I should point out, this has not been peer-reviewed, but I really welcome and encourage all of you to go straight to the MTV Shuga website straight after this, and please do peer-review it for yourself. So the World Bank's DIME team carried out an independent evaluation of MTV Shuga. It was a randomized controlled trial in urban and peri-urban southwest Nigeria. They surveyed 5,000 young people aged between 18 to 25 with a baseline and the follow-up survey to find out what effect MTV Shuga had on them and their lives. And as a result of this study, we now know, among other things, that those who watched MTV Shuga were twice as likely to get tested for HIV 6 months after watching the show. And there was a 55% reduction in STIs among women after watching MTV Shuga over 6 months, with chlamydia used as a biomarker. And the young women interviewed were also choosing fewer and safer partners. Now, 20 years ago, when I began working on HIV prevention, I used to convince organizations, and I think there may even be a few of individuals in this room who I first talked to, I used to convince people to fund us based on my gut instinct, and of course, having access to the MTV brand. Today, happily, I don't need to do that anymore. What the World Bank evaluation has allowed us to do is show that MTV Shuga can change behavior, attitudes, and generate demand. And we currently have ongoing large-scale independent evaluations of MTV Shuga in Nigeria, again with Tulane University, and starting up in South Africa and Côte d'Ivoire with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And it is so important for all of us to really understand the impact of behavior change and demand creation campaigns and the role that it has to play in fighting this epidemic. From global complacency to incredible innovations such as PrEP and self-testing, our role at MTV Staying Alive, using things like MTV Shuga, is to tackle the issues in the most creative of ways. But we absolutely cannot do it alone. It is through working with all of you that we are able to make change. By having the broadest coalition of partners, we can pull all of our individual expertise to make the larger whole. Our role is not to work in isolation. We are your bridge. We can create behavior change and demand around your scientific innovations and then drive youth to your services where they can get the treatment they deserve. When MTV Staying Alive first started, there were very few people who really believed that media could generate positive improvements in individuals' lives. And not many people believed that innovative, creative, and non-traditional approaches to behavior change and demand creation could be effective. Today, we see that not only is it possible, but it can be unimaginably effective. So if there is one thing that we can leave everyone with today, it is that telling stories can be far more powerful than we ever really imagined. It is how you decide to tell such stories and through which mediums that can dictate whether we can save young people's lives. Thank you very much.
The conference organisers would like to thank all the speakers and co-chairs for their participation. The plenary session is now over. We wish you all an excellent day at the AIDS 2018 conference. As you leave the room, please remember to return your headsets at the door or give them to one of our volunteers. Thank you for your cooperation.